Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Susan Bozier, and I am the Social Policy Director for the State League of Women Voters here in Pennsylvania. And I want to thank all of you for joining us for this evening's webinar. And before we get started, for your awareness, the panel is being recorded tonight. If you're uncomfortable with your face being in the recording, please feel free to turn your camera off. And also a reminder that closed captioning is available in Zoom. To enable closed captions on your screen, just click Live Transcript in your Zoom taskbar. If you need any more assistance with closed captioning, I'm dropping a help document in the chat. If we can improve accessibility for you in any way, please let us know in the chat. So we begin our events here for the League with a land acknowledgement. And we will begin our time together. The background: colonial Pennsylvania boundaries were first drawn in 1681 over original nation's land. We in Pennsylvania acknowledge the land ownership of original indigenous peoples, honoring the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the great nations of Pennsylvania, including Erie, Iroquois, Munsee, Delaware, Shawnee, Ohio Valley, Susquehannock, and Lenape. We honor all original nations of the past and those among us today. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. Our state office oversees a grassroots network of 30 local leagues all across Pennsylvania, and also includes a lot of folks who are members at large. The League encourages informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and to influence public policy through education and advocacy. To learn more about our work and to subscribe to our action alerts, please visit our website, and we'll put links up in the chat regarding who we are, how to subscribe, and also some information about ballot box basics. So tonight's program is called Censorship in Schools, What Can You Do? It is oriented for league members, but also citizens, parents, people who are living in Pennsylvania and have interest about what's taking place with regards to censorship in schools. And we've been joined by some experts in the field who are going to share some perspectives with us. The first one who'll be speaking is Susan Spica of Ed Voters Pennsylvania. Susan is the Executive Director of Education Voters PA, an organization whose mission is to ensure elected officials adopt and implement a pro-public education agenda. Susan's been an active volunteer in her children's own public schools in Pennsylvania since her oldest daughter entered kindergarten in 2007. Our second speaker is going to be Ashley Giles Perkins of Education Law Center. Ashley joined the Philadelphia office of the Education Law Center in October 2020 as an Independence Foundation Public Interest Law Fellow. The Education Law Center mission is to increase access to quality public education for all children in Pennsylvania. And our third speaker is going to be Amy McGanrahan. Liz Downing, I'm not sure, Liz, if you're speaking as well, but Liz is here with us tonight. Both of them are long-term members of the League of Women Voters of Bucks County, a group of over 200 volunteers dedicated to empowering voters in the Bucks County area. And they're going to be talking about their experience related to this issue as a case study, actually, if you will, over the last few years since the last elections. And they have some interesting stories to tell. So throughout tonight's presentation, you are welcome and encouraged to ask questions, but please use the Q&A function of Zoom. It's down at the bottom of the screen. We'll answer as many questions as possible. You can also engage with fellow participants in the chat, but if you have any particular questions you'd like to share with the panelists, please use the Q&A. Okay, so we're going to begin with the presentation now. And we're going to start with Susan Spica, again, of Education Voters of Pennsylvania. Thank you for being here.
Yep, thank you for inviting me. And so I'm delighted to be here. Education Voters is a statewide nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we have really worked closely with the league for many, many years. And I really deeply value our partnership. And thank you for having us here tonight. So I just am going to start off, and it's going to be pretty short. I think we all understand that this upcoming school board election is going to determine a lot of what happens in our schools when it comes to censorship in the upcoming year. So, Pennsylvania has become an increasingly large focal point for extremists who have found that by targeting school boards, they are able to impose a political agenda onto a lot of people. And I think that, and I'm putting a two-pager that we have about this issue in the chat right now. School boards have enormous power. There are 9 members on a school board. And with 5 votes, school boards can do pretty much anything they want, if we're going to be completely honest, is I'm sure we will hear from people who've been on the ground in Bucks County and what they've experienced. And so, we're heading into an election where, 499 school districts are going to elect at least 4, and in many cases, 5 or more school board members. There are very competitive races right now. There is a lot of money that is being put into these school board races that is not local money. And I think that we should all kind of like think about that. When you are driving through your town and you see a yard sign for a candidate, take a second and stop and see who it's paid for by, right? When I ran for school board and I had yard signs, they were paid for by me, because I wanted to make sure that I was able to get my name out there. So we made some signs. When you start to see school board signs, school board candidate signs that are paid for entities that aren't in your community, I think it's time to do a little research and to try to kind of figure out what is going on and start to think about where is this money coming from? What is the agenda behind outside money that's getting, literally fire hosed into communities right now. So I guess I will kind of turn this over to Ashley, because this is about censorship, but I cannot tell you enough that this is probably the most consequential election for children in Pennsylvania that we have ever seen. And that if people do not figure out who is on the ballot and do not vote, we are going to see dozens, if not more than 100 districts that are going to be flipping over to having people who have very extremist views and have enormous power who will be taking over. So my advice is to find out what's happening in your local school board. And if there are candidates and your values align with those candidates, ask them what you can do to help them, and start helping them now, because we don't have a lot of time to waste. And the other side is definitely doing a lot of work. So that is what I have to say. Happy to answer any questions later. So thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Susan. I appreciate it. We're going to turn now to Ashley Giles Perkins from Education Law Center, who's going to give us some additional perspectives about the authority that school boards actually do have and what are some of the legal options that are available to us. So Ashley.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for having me and for joining at an evening on Tuesday. Just a quick note, I think most of us know, but it is Banned Books Week. And unfortunately at Education Law Center, we've seen a flurry of banned books this week. So I'll put some materials in the chat as I go, but gonna just go ahead and jump right in to discuss overview of school board authorities and what you can do about it. So covering just quickly, and Susan, thanks for covering just some of the basics. So you may hear school board members refer to as school board directors, and that is essentially because they are directing the actions, functions of the school. So they adopt and revise policies. They have oversight over the resources, and there is typically a superintendent and solicitor that are involved, secretary, board secretaries. Those are some of the key roles everywhere except Philadelphia. School board members are elected by the residents. In Philadelphia, they're appointed by the mayor. And then, as mentioned, there are terms that are sort of alternating so that it's not the entire school board up all at once, but typically about half every 2 years. So the powers that the school board maintain are to establish, equip, furnish, and maintain the schools in their district. So there are a lot of authorities that they do have, particularly levying taxes, adopting curriculum and courses of study, to establish disciplinary policies or approve or affirm disciplinary decisions, hiring personnel, firing personnel, and other decisions. School districts are sort of considered, and not sort of, but it is creation via the statute. And so in some sense, they function as agents of the Commonwealth. And so wanting folks to hold that in, because in order to be considered, governing body of the General Assembly, one must be in alignment with the law. And so we'll talk about that. School boards are policy-making bodies responsible, again, for developing and revising. Those policies essentially provide the framework or guardrails for school district activities and ensure that the school district's actions are complying with state and federal law. Policy revisions must, emphasis on the must, go through a public review process. This generally includes review by a committee and consideration at 2 separate board meetings. The public must have an opportunity to provide input on the policy changes. School boards are able to limit public comment, but cannot totally restrict or revoke it. Thinking in some of our districts, I know I was looking to see who's here, sometimes raising concerns that the policies are have not gone through the correct process, that policies are sort of being pushed through at a rapid pace. There are timelines, typically in the school board's policy. It can differ by district, but does typically comply with the committee being sort of the first opportunity, relevant committee, whether it be curriculum committee, personnel committees, etc. That's typically the first place when policies pop up at the school board meetings without notice and without it being published first. That is where you start running into issues. In general, boards must follow state and federal laws. This would include the existing laws that protect students and staff from discrimination on the basis of race, national origin, disability, sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation. Policies are not permitted to be vague or overbroad, meaning a lay person, a community member, a citizen should be able to read it and typically understand it. Right? And board actions may not be arbitrary and capricious or unreasonable. I mean, you can't just do things because the wind blows to the left. There needs to be some sort of articulable, legitimate purpose for the policy. And so sometimes you'll see a policy and it'll say right at the top, this is the purpose of the policy or the mission. And that is to get at this arbitrary and capricious standard. So the policy-making bodies or school board directors must follow, like I said, non-discriminatory laws. And if the board policy is arbitrary or capricious, vague or overbroad, it opens the door up for legal challenges. Arbitrary, to be clear, being defined as conduct based on random or convenient selection, choice, capricious meaning erratic, flighty, unpredictable. Examples being school board policies, such as sometimes relating to discipline, could even be related to grooming or residency documentation requirements. There's a number of examples. The other thing that must happen is the school code requires school boards to make formal complaint procedures on the website. So every school board should have online options for citizens to make a complaint on the website. Going into some authority and then limitations. So as stated earlier, school boards have the power to adopt, arrange courses for study. So funding a new robotics program or approving a new African American history class. What they cannot do is go around or contradict the state's learning standards. The state has already set that forth through core and model curriculum. Pennsylvania Department of Education sets out the standards for the 500 districts in Pennsylvania to follow. School boards also cannot violate the First Amendment in their policies. This U.S. Supreme Court in the Board of Regents case from 1967 still governs here. And so it's what is called a pall of orthodoxy, and that's sort of a legal jargon that we can break down. So thinking of pall being as a cloth, right, spread over a coffin or tomb, thinking like pallbearers, right, dark clouds, veils, coverings. So you don't want to sort of have that, covering or clouding of generally accepted theory or practice, which is orthodoxy. So in William Brenner's majority opinion, it was proclaimed that academic freedom is of special concern of the First Amendment, and that will not be tolerated laws that cast this pall of orthodoxy over classrooms. And so there is some discretion if it's not specifically stated in state academic standards, but our Chapter 4 PA code does already outline, for example, model curriculum. There's a couple examples that we could have done. I picked books and curriculum because it's Banned Books Week. And so just some other examples, thinking of books being assigned as a part of the curriculum in one category, and then sort of free range, for example, library books, right? Not curriculum. And so there are some distinctions there in terms of what the law says. Pennsylvania law does give, as I said, boards broad discretion over decisions. Boards are responsible to, quote, adopt a course of study. This is typically, right, delegated to superintendents who works closely with teachers and curriculum experts, right? There may be a curriculum committee or curriculum director. Those folks have the authority to select textbooks, make recommendations for curricular materials. Federal courts have affirmed this discretion of school boards, where the limit being via curricular decisions comes from the PICO case in 1982. So again, relatively long-standing settled law that as of late is very much in the news as school boards and school board actions are in the media more and more. This discretion is broad. However, it is not limitless. So, quote, imposing identifiable religious creed within the curriculum is not permitted. Separation of, church and state. Limits when you have that would impair permanently the student's ability to investigate matters that would arise in the natural course of intellectual inquiry. So that's a quote from the case. And that maybe some folks would say, what does that mean? That seems vague. I thought you couldn't be vague. And so we look to case law that has followed. And so leading cases from book banning is largely from the 1980s. There was another rise in the mid-90s, again in the early 2000s, and then present day. We have some case law from the 11th Circuit, 3rd Circuit, finding that, school boards removing certain materials from the curriculum, while allowing those same books to remain in the library was reasonably related, that it wasn't something that would be restricted as a whole, but to remove certain things from the curriculum that wasn't for religious reasons, and reflected community values, didn't impair students' abilities to investigate matters that arose naturally, that was found to be okay. However, on the other side, there have been courts that have ordered reinstatements to high school curriculum, school boards that removed things because there were allegations of violence or impacts on students' religious and family values that was found to go too far. That was an overstepping of power. So just in contrast, library books as a part of the curriculum, there's far less discretion here. And non-curricular materials such as library books. The Supreme Court in the same case, PICO case, libraries have a unique role that is different from the mandatory curriculum. It is a place to test or expand upon ideas that are presented in the classroom. And so that's a very fine line that the Supreme Court has drawn. So in the spirit of the First Amendment, contract the spectrum of available knowledge by prescribing a narrow view. Essentially, First Amendment requiring that students are free to inquire, and the school library is, quote, the principal locus of such freedoms. So you cannot remove books simply because you do not like the ideas contained within them, in order to be prescribing what might be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion. Courts have long rejected book removals for a number of things, but it's too racial, or it's too controversial, or there's a gay relationship, or it might incite students to be disrespectful or disobedient. All of those are specifically struck down as going too far, overstepping the limits. And so policies sometimes are drafted as neutral, but there may be discriminatory intent. And so that is what we're seeing, and that is sort of I won't say loophole. We wouldn't say that it's a loophole. It'd say that the Supreme Court has been pretty clear for a number of decades. But for example, words and phrases like sexualized content, that is an example of something that may be broad and vague. And that is pulled from some of the policies that we've been seeing, unfortunately, across the state. So that's just a little bit on school boards. Wanted to spend just a few minutes on resolving disputes, or options for complaints. There's a lot, and so make sure that we have time at the end. Just going to cover a few. So there's the Office of Civil Rights, OCR. There's ability for agency initiated, or individuals, or an organization. Really, anyone can file it. If you're filing it on behalf of someone else, you just need written consent. There's a variety of issues covered, typically the ones that are protected. This is where everyone is not under the purview of OCR, right? So it's those that are receiving funds from the U.S. Department of Education. So that's the distinction here. We also have a state agency, PHRC, the Human Relations Commission. This is our sort of state arm, and it applies more broadly, typically individual, again, and agency initiated. Public accommodations is their purview. So that does include public schools, public housing, employment, government jobs. And that covers a wide, again, race, color, sex, which includes sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, SCOGI, religion, national origin, ancestry, disability, and retaliation for filing a complaint is also specifically covered. So this is rooted in our state statute, the PHRA, which prohibits discrimination and works to protect those, particularly on those bases that are listed over there on the left. So this does not work for distinctly private educational institutions. So parochial schools and other sorts of private entities, private actors would not be covered. We have our Sunshine Act, or Open Meetings Law. This is also state statute, requires agencies to deliberate and take official action on agency business in open and in public meetings. So as I mentioned earlier, meetings needing to be noticed, public being able to attend and participate, which you almost want to put an asterisk there, right? Sometimes school boards meetings, particularly in our virtual world, things have maybe grown more or less accessible, and the ability to comment before the agency takes the official action. There are essentially fines. It's criminal sanctions that result in fines for violating the Sunshine Act. So anyone really who perceives a violation of law at any time during any public meeting is eligible to lodge Sunshine Act violations. When raised, this may be most helpful. Objections must be noted in the minutes for that meeting. That's going to be helpful for this last piece at the bottom. It's really quick turnaround. It's only 30 days. And if you do manage to pursue it in the right amount of time, the burden is really heavily on the complainant to have the proof. And so sometimes that proof is going to be the meeting minutes from the agency or board that you're filing the complaint against. That may not be the most helpful person in the complaint, but that's typically where the information comes from. But now some school boards, as we know, post on online. You may have other notes or witnesses. Right to know requests, I won't cover it in depth. Just knowing that this is, again, another state statute designed to protect public and make sure there's access to records of governmental bodies. And this is also very open, that essentially anyone can file. Just lastly, educator misconduct is a thing. There's an option for folks to file complaints against specific educators. It needs to be pretty articulate in terms of having a detailed description of the misconduct, dates, copies of documents, where that person works, all of the information that you have. And so I will share a link more about that. This is, I guess, one of the lesser known options. And then, of course, Title IX, under our federal law, every school district or entity must have a coordinator. Responsible employees are essentially required to report, or that someone believes they have this authority would be considered. And it must be that the details are reported to the coordinator designee within 24 hours. So there is an obligation to address sexual misconduct when an employee knew or should have known. So that's another option in terms of complaints. So wrapping up here, here's some information from the Education Law Center. We do have a helpline. We also have a back to school guide covering a number of issues. There's over 60 fact sheets and toolkits on our website. And my contact information. I apologize for speed talking. I'm sure there's a number of questions and we'll be able to get to that at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashley. An awful lot of information presented there. My head's spinning just a little bit. I'm sure that we'll get into this a little bit more in our question and answers too. And a reminder to everybody, please feel free to use the chat to communicate with each other. But if you have a question or questions for the panelists, please do put that in the Q&A that is right at the bottom of the screen. You can see there's already a few questions in there now, so please do add those in. And we'll do question and answers after we've heard from all of our panelists. Okay, next we're going to turn to Amy McGarren. McGarren. Sorry for that. Again, a longtime member of the League of Women Voters in Bucks County, who's had quite a bit of experience with the things that we're talking about. So, Amy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. All right, happy Banned Book Week, everyone. And I'll start by talking about in November of 2021, the New York Times aired a two-part podcast on the Central Bucks School Board over the past year. Our school district became a national story and continues to be as we head into the 2023 school board elections. Let's look at how we got here and what has happened since we first made national headlines. How did COVID restrictions, school boards, extremist political interests, dark money, book bans, and censorship all collide in my beloved Pennsylvania community? Next slide. So as I said, the New York Times aired a two-part series on school board wars. Seemingly overnight, a new battleground has emerged in American politics, school boards. In these meetings, parents increasingly engage in heated, sometimes violent fights over hot-button issues. Next. Paul Martino, a Doylestown resident, venture capitalist, and member of the Federalist Society, starts the Reopen Pennsylvania Reopen Bucks PAC. This PAC in 2021 donates over $500,000 to fund candidates for school board who oppose COVID health and safety protocols. In May of 2021, in a surprise vote just prior to the adjournment of our school board meeting, a motion is made to reorganize the school board leadership. This vote passes 5-3 with 1 abstention. The new school board majority is now able to set the agendas for all our future meetings. Next. In August of 2021, before the school year is beginning, a press conference is held to support masking. This press conference turns into a shouting match with pro and anti-maskers. And then at the August 2021 school board meeting, the school board votes down at a 5-4 vote any mask requirements and any COVID mitigation measurements. Next. In November 9th, 2021, 5 school board directors are voted into office. 3 are Republicans and 2 are Democrats. 1 of the candidates wins by less than 80 votes. 2 of the elected board members are members of Moms for Liberty. There's a quote I want to read that I can't see. Liz, can you see that quote to read that? It's kind of an important quote. All right, I guess not. We'll move on, but one of the school board members who's elected has a pretty powerful, strange QAnon quote, we'll just say very simply. She's a member of QAnon, and she her quote is of that nature. In May 6th of 2022, teacher Andrew Burgess, who is an advocate for the LGBTQ students, is placed on a sudden leave of absence. Some parents and students believe he is being disciplined for providing the contact information for the U.S. Department Office of Civil Rights to a student and their parent. Mr. Burgess is then moved to another school for the 2023 school year, and again, he is put on administrative leave in April of 2023. He has recently filed a suit against the school district. Next slide. In June of 2022, the superintendent orders pride flags to be removed from the classrooms. The superintendent explained the decision by comparing pride flags to political flags and by noting that pride flags have become divisive. After months of pushback from parents, educators, students, librarians, the ACLU of Pennsylvania, and the Education Law Center of Philly, the Central Bucks School Board passes the most restrictive library policy in the Commonwealth, Library Policy 109.2. This vote is 6-3. The decision on what books to have available to children is no longer the decision of trained librarians, but our school board. Due to the backlash from the book ban, the superintendent recommends and the board votes 6-3 to retain a public relations firm at the cost of $15,000 a month. After 6 months, the public relations firm resigns. In October of 2022, the U.S. Department of Education announces it will investigate the Central Bucks School District, following an ACLU complaint alleging a hostile environment for LGBTQ students. In October of 2022, draft policy 321 is introduced to replace current policy 321. The revised policy will codify the pride flag removal and prohibit classroom discussion of anything considered socio-political. In November of 2022, the Central Bucks School Board votes 6-3 to hire former U.S. Attorney William McSwain to represent the school district following the ACLU of Pennsylvania federal complaint alleging the hostile environment for the LGBTQ students. His fee for service is $940 an hour. Bill McSwain, if you don't know him, ran for governor of Pennsylvania in 2022 in the primary, during which he posted a photo of the Westchester Area School District Gay Straight Alliance And he wrote, "This ends when I'm governor." After 90 minutes of public comment, policy 321 passes with a 6-3 vote. The community protests. On January 27th, 2023, at Holocaust Remembrance Day, the forced removal of an Elie Wiesel quote at a high school library causes public outcry and receives national media attention. The quote is said to go against the new policy 321. Administration allows the return of the quote at the school library, but shortly after that, the school librarian retires early. The quote is, "We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." In April, the school board calls a special meeting to present the findings of the McSwain law firm. This investigation costs our taxpayers $1.4 million. The findings: a teacher and a Democrat school board member are to blame for the ACLU investigation. The sham report finds no fault with the school administration and no hostile environment for the LGBTQ students. The actual report with the education office has not come out yet. In July of 2023, the superintendent gets a new 5-year contract with 3 years still remaining on his current contract. He's only been our superintendent for 2 years. He receives a 40% $90,000 raise plus an increase of his benefits. The new contract and raise passes with a 6-3 vote. There is no discussion of how and who negotiated this contract. Policy 123.3 which addresses sex-based discrimination in athletics, is introduced in August. This new policy, if passed, will discriminate against transgender students in school sports. The ACLU has warned the district that this is illegal. As of September 2023, 70 books have been challenged and 2 books have removed based on the new library policy. Each book review costs $1,000. Our most recent meeting, September 12th, the school board meeting hits a new low with verbal attacks on school board members, school board candidates, and a teacher. This escalates to a brief altercation when a public commenter threatens a school board member. The meeting is briefly stopped while police remove the 2 men involved. November 7th, 2023. Please vote in your school board elections and encourage your friends and family to do the same. This is not an isolated instance happening in our school district. School boards across the country are facing similar challenges. Be informed about your candidates. Use vote411.org to get information on where your candidates stand on the issues. If your candidate is unwilling to participate in our nonpartisan survey, you should be concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good. I'm going to follow up with just a few brief comments about actions that people can take. Sam, if you could put up the slides for that, please.
Yes, Jimmy, just 1 second.
Sure. So let's go to the next. There we go. So in advance of the election, a couple of things that we're going to recommend for local leagues in particular. In each school district, it's important that local leagues are posing questions for candidates for school board for all of the school boards in their county, and specifically about the issue of censorship. And then we ask that this information, if it has not been yet, be posted in Vote 411. All of the responses that they receive, but also note specifically those candidates who did not respond. We're also encouraging local leagues to submit an op-ed to their community newspaper or letters to the editors of local newspaper, highlighting the importance of knowing where candidates stand on this issue and directing them to vote 411. And in a number of counties, here in Indiana County, for one, the use of the local radio station to share information with voters has been very, very useful. And for voters, we're encouraging them obviously to use 411 to examine the candidates for school board in your districts, and to be wary about people who have not submitted any information for the website or choose not to respond to the question about diversity and curriculum development. And do look for people who are aligned with your values. And we are also encouraging them to write letters to the editor of your local paper. One thing I think I want to highlight with why we're stressing this is, I think I picked up on this, but I want to clarify and maybe ask you in a couple of minutes, Amy, to speak a little more to this. My understanding is that the position that the individuals held with regard to school censorship, it was not publicly available for those who are running for office in advance of that. But then taking very aggressive moves afterwards. So it is important that we're making sure that we're asking questions about that and we know who the people are and where they stand. Can I have the next slide, please? After the elections, I want to stress a couple of things here is that once people are elected, if things start to surface, we want to encourage people to be watchful about what's taking place, attend the school board meetings. And if possible, it's better to even go in numbers, go with friends, go with family members, to the extent that it can, because what we've been hearing from Bucks County and a couple of others is that when a school board has the sense that someone is paying attention, it may not stop the agenda, but it can slow things down a bit. It can put some pressure on them. Secondly, we also ask that when you do go to school board meetings, that you do express your point of view during the public comment periods. It can be, I think, intimidating to speak up at a point like that, be concerned about getting people angry, etc. But we do want to encourage you to make your voice heard. Another way to do that is to send letters to the editor. If a school board member or school board members raise pro-censorship actions and and to highlight that this is taking place and present the logic of your argument. Again, it's important to incorporate local news services in this. And we want to encourage you too to use social media. And one thing that I know that Bucks has done, and maybe they can talk a little bit more about this, is to highlight the values of particular books that are getting banned. There's reasons why these books are in the libraries in the first place. And I'm also going to raise the potential, if there's anybody present who has interest or capacity to do this. I know we at the league here at the state tend to use social media, but are not doing much with TikTok in particular. TikTok, though, is the #1 resource, social media resource for younger people. Very often, it's where they get their news often. And we'd like to encourage people to, again, to put their interests online in TikTok, because we're more likely to reach young adults that way and encourage them to participate. And they have strong strong interest in these concerns as well. And then finally, if there are banned book clubs in your community, we encourage you to participate or consider starting one. Again, get people talking about the books and why they might be being banned and what the values are with that. Okay, I'm done with the slides, Sam. Okay, and we're going to open this up for questions now. So if you do have questions, please do feel free to put your message down in Q&A and we'll get started with that. Also, if you can, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there are a few attendees who have their hands raised. Lori
Okay.
and Mariana, if this is a question that can be asked in the Q&A, I'm going to ask you to put it in the Q&A. If it's not, you can just tell me in the chat and I'll allow you to talk, if that makes sense. But we're going to start with the Q&A questions. Would it be helpful if I read them out?
Actually, it would.
All right. So we have a question. What kind of presence does the solicitor play on the school board and or parents? I think that probably was for Ashley.
That would be my guess.
Yes, and I answered two questions, and I don't know that everyone, I think some people maybe joined from the phone, so if we can go back. But the solicitor is essentially the person that should keep the school board in check, and make sure that they are following and adhering to the law, state standards. That person should be, well informed on developing case law, forthcoming statutes or regulations, things that would impact the school board's, decision. So, we've seen on both sides, school boards saying, well, we want to do this. We want to pass this discriminatory policy. And the solicitor saying, I wouldn't advise that. That's not advisable. And then the school board saying, well, we don't advise you and you're fired. And that's happened. And it's happened the other way around, where the solicitor says, I've done all I can do. I'm throwing up my hands and I resign, but that's their role to, tell the school board what the law says.
I
Thank you
would
so
say our
much.
solicitor and our top school board administration are on the sides of our school board majority, as our superintendent was rewarded very recently with that large raise for backing, for protecting his job and going along with what the majority wants to do. The solicitor makes very few comments. They do turn to him, but he is often very quiet. And again, I think some people are protecting their jobs over their values.
Thank you, Amy. We have another question. I'm going to lump this into two questions because I think it ended up being a two-parter, which is, have you seen cases of bad actors abusing sunshine law to misrepresent board members with false accusations, excuse me? In other words, what do we do about people petitioning for sunshine records and then using them against school board members?
And I don't know if others, Susan, Amy, have seen this. I think what we see typically is that Sunshine Act violations are raised, but then are not filed. It does require someone to go in, typically to the Court of Common Pleas, and essentially file a private action, which takes time, resources, money, potentially a lawyer, and the timeline is so tight of just the 30 days that it's not something that that we've seen at ELC. But for the other piece, in terms of it, maybe like right to know requests, getting information, and then flipping that information around, I think that may be something that happens, and I don't know if the other panelists can be more specific.
I'll agree with that. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask Ashley this question because this is something that someone asked me and I didn't know the answer to. There was a school district that was providing information to families that had personally identifiable information in it of people in the records that were requested. And I wasn't sure if that was something that the school district was supposed to like redact information, or can they provide like student and parent names in their records? So it was like emails with principals, that had personally identified, and even if they like took some stuff out, they left some stuff in.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe there were some redaction issues. There are things that are considered to be within the public's knowledge. For example, you sign up online or in person to speak at a school board meeting and you give a testimony, and now you're on the record, you're in the minutes, it's Control F if it's posted online, and find your name and like, oh, I testified 5 times. It's something that you can go back to. But for things like emails, private emails, things like that, identifiable information, never want to share anyone's address. Students are protected under other protections and privacy acts, where giving the parent would have to release the student's information and give the okay and consent on that. So if student information was shared, I would think that was an error. If it was anything other than public comment or something sent and essentially availed to the public.
I would say in our county, the right to know requests have gone totally blown up. And so someone will get a right to know request, and then they will publish that information publicly on social media.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna mark that one as done. Next question is, are private schools exempt from censorship laws and regulations? And then the person was asking it in reference to the anti-public school tide that is rising. So do these regulations apply to charter schools, parochial schools, things like that?
Mostly no. A lot of them tied, just thinking particularly Title IX and sort of the purview of, Office of Civil Rights, are tied to receiving federal funds. There are schools that may fall within that category or have received particularized grants that would open up the door to them being then accountable to those federal rules or rule others. And then even for our Pennsylvania Human Relations Act and Commission is for sort of public facing agencies, entities, employers, housing, government. However, for charter schools are considered to be public schools. And so they would fall under that purview. There's more limitations for private school. I wouldn't say anyone is exempt. Just the channels of seeking redress are different. So it's not necessarily a Title IX violation or, a PHRC complaint, but there's other avenues, typically private actions, court litigation, civil actions that may be filed. You just would need to check it's sometimes against someone in their individual capacity, as opposed to them as like a director or, CEO or, role on a school board. If they even call it a school board, they may or may not even, have one.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna turn quickly because of the who was in line, so to speak. Lori, I'm gonna allow you to talk if you can hear me, and I'll let you ask your question, and I will allow you to talk now. Maybe the hand was it might have been a mistake that she put her hand up.
I think it was a mistake.
Okay, no worries. I'll just stick you back on mute.
Well, no, what I would point out though is I think that what Amy was discussing and was asking Liz about is some of the very bizarre statements that have been made at Central Bucks school board meetings. I mean, that type of behavior, you would think that that kind of information, Ashley, I mean, when someone is saying something that is violent, as you so stated, how does that impact that school board? Or how can that person be censored themselves?
Thank you, Lori. I'm going to put you back on mute, Lori, so we can get the question answered. Thank you.
And I was like, someone posted it earlier, and it's one of those things where, it's like we want to uphold the Constitution and the First Amendment, right? We don't want it to be sort of undercut. And then there's those instances where the protected speech would be considered harmful or hateful. And so there's limits at the same time, but there was a link shared earlier about, private actors sort of ranting during school board meetings, making offensive comments, the board sort of censoring them, muting the mic, asking them to leave, and they filed a lawsuit and they were successful in that action. And so that is not exactly what, folks would want. I think there are some school boards in terms of their personal policies that have, almost, we may have them in other spaces, right? Think of them as like community guidelines or, regulations or creating spaces of respect and, affirming we don't do this here, we do this here, we don't yell, we talk it out, or, just sort of tone setting at the beginning of meetings about what is and isn't tolerated. But there are some, sticky scenarios in terms of censorship, particularly for public meeting spaces where that time is for community members to voice, voice their speech. And so, we'll see people speaking on both sides, and school boards allowing that sort of discourse to take place, and making sure that they're, I don't want to say remaining neutral. I think we're unfortunately beyond that, but allowing that to take place, but setting limits when it reaches a point of harassment or bullying or intimidation or hate speech. When you start to get into that realm of disobeying or violating federal law and protections.
Thank you, Ashley. In the interest of time, just because I want to make sure that we get people answered. Mariana and Giselle, I see your hands are up. I'm going to ask you to put your thoughts in the chat or the Q&A, please, just so. And if you have your hand up, I would appreciate, please put your thought in the chat or the Q&A. We only have a couple minutes left, and there are questions that have been waiting for a while. Thank you so much. Susan?
I just want to, before we hop off, say that we have had a statewide coalition of organizations and individuals that have come together called Pennsylvanians for Welcoming and Inclusive Schools. And so we are working together on a website and a sign-on letter to become a formal coalition very soon. My fear is that there will be many, many school boards that are going to be facing these issues as soon as we hit January. And this is going to be a place where people can come to find resources, so that, a lot of the information that Ashley shared, you can find on the Education Law Center's webpage, but it will also be housed at the PA Wins page. And we will have evening webinars for people. So maybe Ashley would be willing to do this again for people who are not connected to the league, but people who are going to find themselves in a situation where they say, I can't believe this is happening in my district. They think they're by themselves, and then they can come and be kind of wrapped in the warm arms of a lot of different people who are doing this work, who can share their strategies.
Thank you so much, Susan. There's another question. And I think Barb is referring to the minutes of school board meetings, but what do you do when the meeting minutes are not available until after 30 days? Would audio recordings be acceptable? I think she's talking in reference to submitting proof of misconduct.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the Sunshine Act. I think it was a two-part question. I answered one in typing, and then there's still this one. But that seems, not that they can't do that, but that's one of those barriers where, well, how could I possibly have the proof if you don't post it until after the timing has expired for me to lodge my complaint? And so, audio recordings in today's age, I want to say yes. I think also making your own record, to say I was present at the meeting and I took these notes myself, and it's backed up by a recording should I need it and it be introduced. I think what the best case is to move forward with filing. The date isn't going to be that 30th day. It's not going to be the date of the hearing. It would be later. So you'd still have a little bit more time to supplement the Sunshine Act violation with more detail later on.
Thank you. And this kind of goes back to our earlier conversation. Melissa, I'm going to connect you offline because I think there's a deeper conversation here from your question. And I want to make sure you have time to talk about it. But right now, thank you all so much for your questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Susan Bozier to close us out.
Yeah, I want to draw your attention actually to something, a post that was made in the chat by Deb Litzwick to Amy. Do you think that anything could have been done in Bucks County to avoid this mess? And Amy's response, very appropriately, is get more people to vote and to know what the candidates stand for. She also mentioned that the 2021 turnout was low. That's exactly the reason behind our hosting this webinar tonight. And one of the things I'll also share with you is that of all the webinars that we've had over the last few years with the State League of Women Voters, this one had the highest number of registrations, with well over 240 people had registered. We normally get between 30 and 40. So we were pretty excited about that. And it's clearly something that's on people's minds. So we do believe it's extremely important to be educating people about this. And there's another question here. Actually, Sam, can I give that to you?
Yeah, we will be putting all slides and YouTube recording will go up on our website. It'll go out via email. I'm currently the only staff member at the league, so it might be a couple days before that happens, but I promise I will get it out. So you will all see it. I'm just speaking for the league. I would love if people shared this out. I think that would be great. So, and if you have any questions, you can feel free to send me an email or give the office a call.
Okay, thank you very much for your work with this evening, Sam and Amy and Liz, Susan, Ashley. Thank you so very, very much for the information. Very timely, critically important to all of us. And we really are grateful for your involvement with this and for the good work that you're doing on behalf of education and students right across Pennsylvania. So thank you all very much.
Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yes, thanks so much.